crazy. Jimmy on the beat, boy.
People, this is the Trophy Room. It is August 7th. It's a Saturday. Thanks for hanging out with us. Today we have to re-engage in the most esoteric and pointless argument of all time. We're talking about our favorite memories from this year's Hall of Fame class in pro football, and the USA, despite giving us all heart attacks, won the gold medal and called out LeBron in the process. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, please go give us a 5-star review. It would help a ton. Get a screenshot, share us on the story, go support the boys. I'm your host, Brett Hammer, alongside a man that absolutely wouldn't leave his wife for LeBron James. That's Jackson Garlitz. That's Jackson with an X. You can find him on YouTube. Just search Jackson Garlitz. He's the first one up in that suit and tie. As always, you can catch me on Instagram at bhammertime with the extra E. Jackson, how are we?
We are not Nick Wright, and that is A-okay with me.
It is interesting. So a lot of people probably have no idea what you're talking about. So Bob Costas, if you probably would I be accurate in saying that the only reason most people would know Bob Costas, like people that are our age, probably the only reason they would know who Bob Costas is because of the Olympics, right?
Probably.
Okay, so Bob Costas used to be like a really big deal, like back in the 80s and 90s, and he still is kind of a big deal, but not if your sports coverage knowledge is exclusive to SportsCenter and occasionally Fox Sports, or not either one of those. Then the only reason you would maybe remember Bob Costas is from the Olympics, because he's usually the guy who's in studio. I believe I want to say that he called the Miracle on Ice back in the day, but obviously most people my age weren't around for that. Bob Costas is one of the greatest sports journalists of all time, like one of the greatest broadcasters of all time. He was a reporter, he's a broadcaster, he's been a host, he's like does phenomenal interviews. So Bob Costas is one of the greatest of all time. So Bob Costas has recently come out of the shadows, and he has a show called, I believe it's called Back on the Record with Bob Costas. And so it's like an HBO show, and he basically sits down. It's kind of like the Joe Buck show back in the day. But basically this whole mess that we now have to have the Jordan LeBron conversation, which I actually don't love to have, but I think in this case it needs to be had. This conversation is being had because Bob Costas has decided to interview Charles Barkley. And okay, before we get into this, I feel like this question no longer actually has the value of who's better than LeBron James. I feel like this question is completely only used for two reasons: for clout chasing and for upsetting another person. Would you agree with that?
I think that the question is mostly bait in order to get somebody to say something that gets clicks. I really do. It's like whenever Fox News talks about lockdowns of the moment, and whenever like CNN talks about Trump, it is literally for the clicks. That's the reason it's there. Because
at the end of the day, and I mean, I'll just give this right off the top, because this is a little bit deeper of a conversation than just who's better than who, because there's like a new spin on it this time that we're taking. But you tell me how you see this. So Charles Barkley is in this interview with Bob Costas, and Bob Costas, like the opening clip, you can look it up on YouTube, just Back on the Record, Bob Costas, and type in Charles Barkley, or if you just type in Bob Costas, Charles Barkley. Bob Costas' first question in this video is Jordan or LeBron, which is so dumb because they absolutely knew who they were interviewing, and Charles Barkley is notorious for saying outlandish things in public and just getting people riled up for absolutely no reason. Of course, so like we all would expect, Michael Jordan is the first name out of his mouth, and then before he gets to why LeBron's not number one, he goes in and says that he has Kobe over LeBron, which is a whole separate argument. And I love Kobe more than most people who don't know him. But like, even I would probably say, I mean, let's have that conversation just for like 5 minutes. Is that fair to say that LeBron's better than Kobe?
It depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking all time.
Yeah. We're ranking them all time.
If we're ranking them all time, then LeBron is better than Kobe. He's better than Kobe. If you're talking people who want to like say that he's already like a better Laker than Kobe, you guys are nuts. But if you're talking all time, then yeah, you have to say LeBron James. And I don't even think, what could you possibly, even scoring, like,
yeah, LeBron averages more than Kobe did.
He averages more than Kobe did. He has more total, I think, than Kobe did. Like, and that was Kobe's biggest trait, was his ability to score.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you want to argue clutch factor, I guess like
I would give that to Kobe.
You could give that to Kobe, but I would argue that most of that is because it was like LeBron is more deferential when it comes to final shot a little bit.
And to let everyone show, like you said, deferential, not differential.
Right. He's deferential like to other players, whereas like with Kobe, you're getting traded if Kobe's not the one that takes a shot and you take it.
Yeah.
Right. And so like if we're talking all time, it has to be LeBron. And this is coming from someone who is a little bit more pessimistic about LeBron's legacy than a lot of other people. Just generally, not because it's a personal vendetta, but just because I think we love recency bias. Right, we love to like put things up there even when they're not up there. But I don't see how you can make the argument. Honestly, I really don't see how you can do it.
Yeah, like I said, I love Kobe Bryant more than most people, and I don't love LeBron James more than most people. But we do have to put it like this. I would say that yes, you're right. LeBron James, he's like a higher career average, which obviously would lead to he's higher on the all-time scoring list than Kobe is.
Yes.
All of that being said, Kobe, I would argue, is more clutch than LeBron. I would argue that LeBron made other people around him better more than Kobe did. But regardless of all of that, people, if you're like my age, if you're within your 20s to 30s, or you're like a teenager and you're in high school, here's the one thing you and I don't get to dispute this. LeBron James has to be the greatest player that you and I ever watched, because we did not grow up watching Michael Jordan. Do you have, I don't have any memories of Michael Jordan except occasionally on the Wizards, and that does not count. So I think would it be fair of me to say that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player that you and I ever witnessed?
You're lying if you say anything different.
Like, who else? I mean, I guess you could argue Kobe, but I still think that LeBron is better than Kobe. The one thing I think we forget about when we talk about number 24, the man did win 5 championships. And is LeBron's at 5 now, yeah?
Yes, because he, like, the original argument was he was like 4 and 6, and now he's 5 and 6.
Yeah, because he had the two in Miami, and he had
1 in the Lakers and then 1 for Cleveland.
So does he only have 4? That doesn't sound right.
Or does he have? Does he have 3 in Miami?
No, he definitely doesn't have 3 in Miami, because I think it were only 3 years. Oh no, you're well, okay. So we're right.
6.
So Michael Jordan or LeBron James only has won 4 championships, which shame on us for not knowing that. But you're right. So we have 2 with Miami, 1 with Cleveland, and 1 in LA. And I would be remiss to argue, or it wouldn't be a reach to argue that I think the Lakers will win. I think he wins another one, regardless of where it is. So getting back to this conversation, the reason this conversation about who's better and whatnot, because I really don't love the Michael Jordan LeBron argument, because it basically just becomes, who are you more obsessed with? Not even who necessarily was better at the game.
They don't play the same they don't play the same positions.
No.
Their focuses aren't the same. Like,
the way they played the game was different.
Is extremely different. The eras that they played in are so unbelievably different. It really is like people saying, "Hey, which is better, pizza or hamburgers?" And it's like, well, no, that doesn't really, like, that's a matter of personal preference. It doesn't really have anything to do with objective, like, which one's better.
Like you and I could debate whether or not it's better with bacon, but you and I aren't debating whether or not like whether or not a burger is better with bacon, but not debating whether or not a burger is better than a pizza.
It makes no sense. Like, they're not even the same. It's apples and oranges. It's really difficult to compare.
And for the sake of this, like, you technically, I feel like, have to. And if I have to, then I think I'm gonna. But to me, that's like, it's almost similar to the football argument where it's like, well, who was greater, like Jerry Rice or Tom Brady? And it's like, dude, are you kidding? Do you understand the astronomical like gap and separation that there is between playing quarterback and playing wide receiver? Quarterback is the most critical position in all of sports. Any sport ever, quarterback is the most critical position. So comparing those two doesn't make any sense. Like, there's a thing that people forget. Michael Jordan was honestly, he was a scorer first, and then like everything else second. LeBron James is basically a point guard, that also scores really well and also plays defense. But like, just like you're right, the way they played the game is different. So comparing them doesn't make a lot of sense. If I have to argue, then I'm probably going to say Michael 1, LeBron 2. But again, I don't hate people who think it's LeBron. I just hate people who think it's astronomically one way or the other, because it's not.
Well, and if you say it's astronomically one way or the other, like going back to like the whole like wide receiver, like quarterback argument, who's better, Devontae Adams or like Aaron Rodgers? Like, even if they were on the same talent level, which I would argue like Aaron Rodgers is in the conversation for like one of the most talented quarterbacks of all time.
And
I don't think Devontae Adams. No, but even leaving that aside, how can you compare that? Like Devontae Adams, his entire job is reliant on his quarterback not sucking.
Exactly.
It is possible. Like Carson Wentz showed us, it's possible to play with deck furniture. It's possible to do so and like put up some good numbers. It is really hard to be a receiver and to play with a quarterback that sucks. Like, it's really difficult to
Can
like,
anyone tell me like who was on that? I genuinely cannot tell you who played wide receiver in that Super Bowl for the Eagles.
No, because like it was literally a bunch of it was like every single person on scholarship at Alabama getting booted off, and then they have a bunch of walk-ons. That's literally what it was like.
Yeah. So people want to trash on Carson Wentz. He's literally never had anyone to throw to. Regardless, this is not the conversation we're having. So the reason that I bring Charles Barkley and Bob Costas into this conversation, the whole reason we are having this conversation, is because Charles Barkley made a comment that fired absolutely everybody up. Twitter was going, Nick Wright was going, and Nick Wright will go about just anything LeBron did. I almost wonder, if you don't know who Nick Wright is, like, just know, if you think he's like the anti-Skip Bayless, where Skip Bayless hates LeBron James with everything that he has, but he loves Michael Jordan. Nick Wright is the complete opposite way, where he's so ridiculous about Michael Jordan. I think he's actually writing a book right now on just the antithesis that is Michael Jordan and how great Michael Jordan wasn't. So
Nick Wright is sports Twitter. If it was a person.
No, that's what I was going to say. I almost wonder if Nick Wright reads LeBron James mentions more than he reads his own mentions, because he is a sports personality, and more than LeBron James reads his own mentions.
100%.
So the reason we're having this conversation is because Charles Barkley came out and said, well, one of the many reasons that I don't hold Michael Jordan in the same regard that I don't hold LeBron in the same regard I hold Michael Jordan, is because, quote, well, LeBron stacked his teams, unquote. So this got absolutely everyone fired up. So I think it's fair. I think it would only make sense to walk through, because I don't think I think it's fair to walk through like LeBron James' actual career. Do we actually feel like he stacked all of these teams? How stacked were they compared to how stacked has everyone else been? So I'll just start with this and then you can take, but like, Nick Wright's whole thing was, oh, well, Charles Barkley shouldn't be commentating on this because he played on one of the greatest teams of all time, that 83 Sixers team, or he got drafted to. And I'm like, yeah, but like, he didn't ever argue. Nobody is arguing that Charles Barkley is one of the greatest of all time. This is the same argument that you and I had before the show. Like,
also, are you going to have the same energy about like Dwight Howard not ever being able to talk about being on LeBron's team? Because then LeBron's teammates can never talk about it either, can they?
Exactly. Like, it doesn't, like, it's irrelevant. So, I guess you tell me, like, those first few years in Cleveland, I don't know that argument holds up.
Right, but I also think the difference is that, like, Michael Jordan, to a degree, had a lot of weight to throw around in the Chicago Bulls, right? And this is actually like pro LeBron. LeBron did not have any capability of changing anything about his team for the first 7 years.
No.
Right? He had no, like he was dealing with Dan Gilbert. He had no ability to do anything when it came to that organization. And it's because the organization sucked, which is the reason they got LeBron in the first place.
And the city of Cleveland was an absolute dumpster fire for 40 years before then, other than that one time with Elo, where the Michael Jordan destroyed the Cavs. Other than that, there's never been any relevance and the most relevant person since LeBron James in the city of Cleveland, I would argue, is Jim Brown.
Sure. And I just think that it's difficult for that first 7 years to compare, because while every single rookie goes through stages where it's like, okay, is this person going to be like our staple, or are they just going to be a really good player who leaves after a while? Michael Jordan had some weight that he could throw around in his organization that LeBron James did not. And so it's kind of like to both sides. It's like, well, LeBron didn't like stack his teams. Well, yeah, but LeBron also couldn't have stacked his teams if he tried. Like, he didn't, number one, he didn't know how. That's why he went to Miami, to learn from Dwayne Wade. Like, he had no clue how to influence free agency. And not only that, like, yeah, he wasn't playing with very good teammates, but the East also sucked. Like, let's not pretend like the East was anywhere close to the West. Like, it sucked. So LeBron couldn't have done what he did in the East and the West. But also, I wouldn't hold that against him, because LeBron was like, he was in his first step. He was like as old as he was like Donovan Mitchell, right? Donovan Mitchell right now has more weight to throw around in Jazz free agency than LeBron James did during his time in Cleveland. And so I don't think it's fair.
I mean, here's the first thing that people have to realize. It took Michael Jordan 7 years to get to an NBA Finals.
Yep.
And it took LeBron James 3 years just to get to the conference finals. And that was back when the Eastern Conference was really good. The Pistons were good. The Spurs were good. The Celtics were good. Like, that was a good NBA. LeBron James, for all that people want to say about LeBron James, he went to the city of Cleveland. People don't realize this. Look. So obviously LeBron's first NBA Finals, we know he lost, but he also had only been in the league like 4 or 5 years, which is faster than it took Michael to get there. And I would argue that, again, like you said, LeBron had less to work with. He didn't have as much power or sway in that organization. Here's the other thing I bet people don't know. Can you tell me a single person who was on any of those NBA Finals teams in Cleveland the first time around, not named Anderson Varejao, and the only reason you remember him is because Dwayne Wade murdered him on live television, or Mo Williams? Like, seriously, like, there's no one else on that team. And maybe you would argue, oh, well, like, we just don't remember, but that doesn't mean that they weren't relevant or there weren't good players on the team. Here's the deal. LeBron's first NBA Finals, and it didn't get better from here. LeBron's first NBA Finals, he was averaging 26 points a game, I believe, and it was, I can't remember who they played, but 26 points a game. The next leading scorer was 12 points a game. And then after that, I believe it was 11, and then there wasn't another double-digit scorer. Everyone was scoring in the single digits, which, if you do the math average-wise, that doesn't add up to 100 points. So people can say whatever they want, but as far as the Cleveland era goes, people want to talk about the struggle. That was another thing that he brought up, because he's like, oh, well, Giannis went through the struggle, Michael went through the struggle, Kobe went through the struggle, like all these guys who stayed in one place to run to a championship. I mean, LeBron literally did the best that he could. I would argue out of Giannis, Kobe, and Michael and LeBron had the worst starting situation of any of them, and he was the fastest to get to the finals.
We'll put it this way. If you want to, like, if you're drafted, where do you want to go? Milwaukee or Cleveland?
Right now, Milwaukee.
Right. And even, like, I would argue back then, Milwaukee or Cleveland. I would argue Milwaukee.
And free agency was not what it is now.
No, there was no player movement. And so the only time players got moved was when organizations were fed up with a player. And so the player got moved. And that typically meant that they were moving a toxic player into a garbage situation, which doesn't help anything.
And nobody teamed up really back in the day. There was, again, I've mentioned this a couple times. You have the one instance of the Karl Malone, Gary Peyton, like Kobe Bryant, Rick Fox thing, and that didn't work out. And so nobody ever wanted to try the free agency thing, the super team, the team up, like the Justice League kind of thing where you just bring everybody together, like, because they saw it only a couple times and it didn't work, and they didn't really figure it out. Nobody figured that out until this Miami team, which, if we're going to call LeBron James a loser for what he did and just discredit those Miami Heat teams, first of all, Michael Jordan or LeBron James on those Miami Heat teams was had some of the greatest seasons of all time. It wasn't like he went there and then was marginalized. He was absolutely like the most physically dominant athlete on planet Earth, and it wasn't even close. And the reason it worked is because Chris Bosh understood, and Chris Bosh just wrote a book on this. You can read it. I've read some of it. Chris Bosh talks about how he had to tone down some of the things that he normally would have turned up when he was in Toronto because he had to let Bron do what Bron does.
Right. And I don't know. When it comes to like what do you expect LeBron James to do? Right? After 7 years, what do you expect him to do? You expect him to stay there and continue to no. You expect him to attempt to do something that you can have your thoughts about the decision. Right? A lot of people were like, it's super drawn out, it's unnecessary, it's unprofessional.
I kind of liked it.
And at the time, I guess you could make the argument that it was unprecedented. I understand that argument.
It was ahead of its time, I would argue.
100%. And also, I would argue that there are people, like, no one's ever done that since.
But here's the thing. You know what we really want? We really want reality TV. That's the reason that people watch all these game shows. That's the reason, like, I've made this argument numerous times before because I think it's, like, sports, the whole narrative of sports is just reality television that people get paid for. Like, it's just reality TV where people end up playing sports in between. So that's why the decision makes a lot of sense to have happened.
Right. You can have an argument about the way that he did so. I think people have a point. People forget. He went in an interview on CNN and he said that race might have been a factor that people disliked the decision. And it number one, like, it's just not a smart thing to say. And number two,
irrelevant.
It's just, you are asking for more validation of people's dislike of you when you point to things that really had no factor in it. Like, basketball players, like basketball fans, are some of the most shallow fans on earth, and you know this because you see like the Kyrie Irving thing, right? People want their team to win. They don't care what color you are. They want their team to win, and so if you leave, they hate you. That's how a lot of basketball fans are. They're beyond shallow, but that to be like it was a race thing. Like Michael Jordan commented on it and said that was not a decision that he loved. Magic Johnson said he wouldn't have joined Larry Bird after LeBron James did that. Right? People forget that, like, people commented on this.
Yeah,
right?
And it was a big deal.
And it was a big deal. And so I just think that at the end of the day, what do you expect LeBron to do? But also LeBron didn't help himself. LeBron was a little bit LeBron rightfully was concerned about LeBron, right, in terms of his career. But at the end of the day, it's like, also, LeBron being concerned about LeBron has been part of the reason that fans are so polarized about him specifically.
LeBron understood something that not a lot of people get. Something that, frankly, it's not fair, but it's true. And a lot of times in life, there are things that aren't fair, but that's how the world works. It's not fair that in 10 years from now, kids, unless you're from the state of Utah, are going to have no idea who John Stockton or Karl Malone is. And I would argue kids now don't know who John Stockton or Karl Malone is.
Which is a pure crime.
It is. But do you know why they don't? Because neither one of those guys won a championship. And there's something about when you win a championship, you are immediately elevated. I would argue probably more kids know today who Brian Scalabrine is than John Stockton. And but you say that, but like we talk about Brian Scalabrine because he won championships irrespective of how good he actually was at basketball.
I think specifically with Brian Scalabrine has also a lot to do with the fact that he's been turned into the biggest meme on the internet.
But that's what I'm saying. Because he won championships. John Stockton is literally like the all-time assist leader, and Karl Malone is top 10 in all-time scoring, and people don't know who they are. Why? Because they didn't win championships. And Kevin Durant also understood this. LeBron understood this. He said, well, he's like, Dwayne Wade's my boy. I can go to South Beach. First of all, if you told me I can move from Cleveland to Miami, I'm taking that every day. Like, that's just from a geographical city upgrade. That makes a whole bunch of sense. And I don't actually think that in the grand scheme of things, the Miami team, like, I'm actually not that irked about it because he got a championship at it. They got 2 out of it. And they did end up, it's not like they beat down on scrubs. They had to play one of the greatest teams of all time in that San Antonio Spurs. Kawhi, there were 4 Hall of Famers on that team and a 5th one in the coach. You had Tim Duncan, you had Tony Parker, you had Manu Ginobili, and you had Kawhi Leonard, all on that team.
I think, let me ask you this, like just taking it on, do you think LeBron James' legacy, I'm not talking about like the actual like relevance of the argument, because I think at this point it's just all conjecture.
Yes.
But do you think LeBron James only winning championships once he began to mold his own teams hurts his legacy?
No. Because this is the one thing that I think saved him. This is what saved his legacy. The narrative and the storyline for beating the Golden State Warriors is absolutely critical in his career. If he doesn't beat the Warriors in Cleveland, coming down from 3-1, I think you can argue, it's very easy to argue that he's not as good as Michael Jordan and that he could only win when he went to super teams. But people can never, like, we can't ever forget what happened that year in 2016 it was, where, first of all, LeBron James comes back to Cleveland. And don't even get, like, that team was not stacked. Tristan Thompson's not a world beater. He's more relevant for what he does with Kardashians than what he does on a basketball court.
Right, but in the context of that season, right, I think, like, the arguments, I'm not arguing that he's anywhere near, like, top-tier centers, but I'm saying, like, he was better in those seasons. He was having career years in those seasons as compared to what he has now.
But would we ever have been talking about him if LeBron James wasn't his teammate? I don't think
I see
so.
That.
I mean, Kevin Love, you could maybe talk about, but again, to me, it's once the wave of recency bias is finished, then you can start to conglomerate everybody together. Like, and we'll have this conversation in a couple minutes, but Utah and I talked about before the show, the Anthony Davis, Scottie Pippen thing, that dynamic duo, like that's a different, but if LeBron James literally went into Golden State down 3-1 with a team with Matthew Dellavedova and Timofey Mozgov and beat this team, basically put them on his back. Yes, Kyrie hit one shot, but if we were going to do that to LeBron, then we have to do that to every time Steve Kerr hit a shot from Michael, which we're not going to because it doesn't matter. Basketball's not a 1-on-5 sport. LeBron James absolutely saved his career by what he did in Cleveland because he came back to Cleveland. He said, "Okay, I learned some things in Miami. I'm coming back to Cleveland. I'm coming back for my city. I'm cleaning up this narrative and I'm winning a championship." Winning a championship, first of all, first team to ever go down 3-1 and win a championship. Second of all, to do it against arguably the greatest basketball team of all time.
I think, and I understand what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of it. I think it does hurt his legacy. And I don't think it's for reasons that are fair, right? But I think it does hurt his legacy. I think at the end of the day...
What specifically?
I think that you have to look at things through the context of history, right?
True,
but not
true.
just through the context of history, but in the context of the time in which it happened,
Yes.
right? When we have conversations about Giannis, what's going to happen is people are going to unfairly say, Giannis stuck it out. Yes, Giannis stuck it out, but his team, right, understood that as part of the condition of him sticking it out, they were getting Drew Holiday, they had Chris Middleton, like they were going to be active in free agency, and so people are going to unfairly be like, well, he stuck it out. Yes, but he had more help than LeBron did in Cleveland. Like, I would argue that Chris Middleton's better than anybody that like LeBron played with in Cleveland for the first 7 years.
Kyrie? Yes.
First 7 years, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's different. But also I think we do this thing where with LeBron, Timothy Mozgov, we don't hear about him anymore and he's kind of a joke. But in that year, he was game-changing.
Really?
For the Cleveland Cavaliers. Tristan Thompson was having a career year. He was a
rebounder, but he wasn't scoring you buckets.
But rebounding is part of what gets you championships.
Yeah, but I think he was averaging like 6 to 7 points a game.
Right, but then you have Tristan Thompson for that, who actually was scoring in that year.
No,
he hasn't done.
You mean Kevin Love?
Kevin Love did as well. Kyrie Irving wasn't yet an all-star, right? Like recognized like by everybody else as like a generational talent. but he was still extremely talented, right? He was an extremely talented player. I think he was basically, I'm not saying he's comparable to LeBron. I'm not saying he has that talent, but he was LeBron in the aspect of that he was a really talented young player on a team with garbage leadership that really wasn't going to go anywhere. And I think you put all those together, we do this thing where we pretend that like LeBron went from Cleveland, right, where he's playing with bums. Like for the NBA, they're better than me, but for the NBA, he's playing with bums. And then he went to Miami, and he's playing with Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade and gets his championships.
Okay.
And then he comes back to Cleveland, and we pretend that he's playing with bums again. He wasn't playing with bums. He was not playing with Dwayne Wade. He wasn't playing with Chris Bosh. But he was playing with a lot better players than he was before. And I think at the end of the day, I don't know that that should be held against him, but I think what's going to happen is people are going to look back at it and they're going to say, well, like after that specifically, after he came back, he wasn't playing with people who had no business playing basketball in the NBA.
But in the context of the conversation we're having, does that fall under stacking a team?
I don't think stack is the correct word, but I think it would be fair to say that LeBron had much more say, right, which he learned in Miami, on that team. And I don't think that stacked is the right word. I think when Charles Barkley says stacked, I think it's really hard to say that. But I would say that we would argue that LeBron James, I'll pose this question to you.
Okay.
Did Michael Jordan ever at any point have the same amount of free agency say that LeBron James does now? Not in the first 7 years, but now.
No, but I think, and you and I will have the Lakers conversation here in a couple minutes, which I actually don't think is as intense. Like we can all agree that the Miami thing was, yes, a little bit stacked. But I don't think you and I agree on is I don't think the Cleveland thing is a big deal at all, because Kyrie Irving was an all-star. Kevin Love, I think, might also have been an all-star. And Tristan Thompson was good, but he wasn't scoring you baskets. Like, I don't find... We have to define what constitutes stacking and what constitutes just having help. Because, the only person that I can think of in the history of any sport ever who's basically been able to carry an entire team on his back is Tom Brady. We're not having that conversation. I don't think it should be held against LeBron James that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love were basically already there when he got there. And I don't think having help is the same thing as having a super team. So I don't think having help hurts your criteria.
I don't think it should hurt LeBron per se, but I do think what we shouldn't do is we should, as you and I both know, that the stat 6-0 in the finals is extremely deceiving. It's extremely.
Why do you say that?
Because I would argue, and this is just me, and this is coming from a person who thinks Michael Jordan's better than LeBron. I would argue that the competition LeBron played in the finals was more difficult than the teams that Michael Jordan played in the finals overall. Overall. I'm not talking specific teams, but overall. I would argue that the talent that LeBron played is higher. And so the whole 6-0 stat that Jordan gets, I don't love that specific stat as a reason for why he's better. I think when it comes to Michael Jordan, we do need to, The Last Dance, right? I think actually one of the good things that it did do is that it promoted a lot of discussion about how good that team actually was and what the actual circumstances within the organization were like. Because I think a lot of people had this rosy view of Michael Jordan just slogged through it and was the most amazing player. And he was. He was, I think, one of the most skilled players on the planet. But it wasn't sunshine and roses. The team didn't always function the way that it was supposed to. And there were a lot of times.
Perfect.
And I think here's also the other thing. The narrative, fair or unfair, around LeBron is going to be that LeBron uses the player and then trades the player. Because he's a player GM, that's going to be the narrative. Whereas what people are going to see
okay with that.
Right. But I think what they're going to see with Michael Jordan is they're going to see individuals, they're going to see an individual who's frick, I have to go and grab Dennis Rodman from Las Vegas, and I will go and do that, and then we're going to come win this championship. I just think the grit factor is what's always going to work against LeBron. And whether or not that's a perception thing versus like an actual material problem, we can have that argument as well. But I think for better or for worse, it's going to hurt LeBron in the long term that he bounced around from so many different teams and became the first player GM. Whereas with Michael Jordan, what's going to happen is history is going to show obstacle, Jordan beats it. Obstacle, Jordan beats it. The nuance of history is going to reward Michael Jordan where it penalizes LeBron. And whether or not that's fair, we can have that argument, but I just don't see a scenario wherein LeBron's legacy ever trumps Jordan's.
No.
Specifically because there's something where there's a mystique about Jordan that we don't have about LeBron because LeBron played in a different age where it's much easier now to look at cracks in the game. And also, what was the weakness in Michael Jordan's game? Not passing would probably be like the one. I'm trying to think of any real weakness. LeBron James, for most of his career, was not a three-point shooter.
Yeah.
He wasn't a three-point shooter. Also, for a lot of, whether this is fair or not, again, Michael was taking the final shot unless your name was Steve Kerr.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's fair, optically, it looks like Kyrie Irving saved LeBron in Cleveland. And I wouldn't say that it's fair, but optically, that's what it looks like to a lot of people. And I think,
but I feel like that's just because that's how we tell. That's how the story is told, not because that's how it actually happened.
And that's what I'm saying. It's like whether or not it's fair. I think a whole lot of this debate is really stupid. Like you,
yeah.
I think a whole lot of the debate is so stupid. But I think if you look at the history and how it's going to go, you can't really criticize Michael for anything except his gambling problem that he had in the NBA. Now there's really nothing you can say about him. LeBron, because he is more vocal than Michael, has said things that were stupid.
Yeah,
he said things that were stupid, and that's going to polarize you. He also revolutionized a lot of the way that we think about players and like superstars, which is going to polarize you.
Yeah.
And I think as well, because of his persona where he's like, he manages the team. He doesn't carry the team. Right. I just think whether or not it's fair, that's how it's going to be for the rest of the time that he's in the NBA. And I think afterwards, history doesn't, you and I both know this. There's a lot of nuance to Jordan's game. There was a lot of nuance to Kobe's game. History doesn't really have nuance anymore, right? Like history has a way, especially after a while, of cementing, and there's no nuance. There's just what happened. With LeBron, there's a lot of nuance to his game, and I think at the end of the day, once things solidify, I don't think it's going to be as kind to him as a lot of people think.
You made the comment about being the first player manager and how that's going to hurt him. I think it just depends on what side of the coin you want to look at, because I want to be in a relationship with a person who, and whether this is a friend, whether this is a wife, whether this is someone I'm dating, like I want that person to be solid in as many situations as possible, regardless of where we're at, whether we're out at dinner, whether we're with the family, like wherever we're at. I want to be with someone who, no matter what the stress levels are and what direction they're coming from, that person is always solid. I would argue you could throw the same backhanded compliment or backhanded argument to LeBron or to Michael, Kobe, Giannis, where, like y'all could only get it done in one place. Like you had it set up for you. You took the plane off, and you basically were never able to land that plane. And once you did, you were never able to take off again. Whereas LeBron can say, dude, I took the plane off, I landed it, I took it off again, landed it, took it off, landed it again. So that comes to the Los Angeles Lakers conversation. And I think a lot of this is tied back to, because we can wrap this up with the Lakers. First of all, before LeBron got to the Lakers, they hadn't been to the playoffs in 6 years. So I don't think that he stacked them. And I also don't think you can consider it stacking a team when you have JaVale McGee, Kyle Kuzma, KCP, Danny Green, and Rajon Rondo. And then, you also have Anthony Davis. To me, that was literally the island of misfit toys, and LeBron took it to an NBA championship. Granted, it was the bubble, but also, I guess we'll probably find out a lot more about this team this next year. I think a lot of Charles Barkley's comments that were made were surrounding the team that we're about to see. Here's the other thing. Michael Jordan just didn't care enough to go out and get whoever he wanted. I would also... LeBron James basically dealt with Jerry Krause his first 7 years in Cleveland. What if Michael Jordan didn't have Jerry Krause, who's to say that Michael wouldn't have gone out and gotten help?
I see what you're saying. I think the problem that most people have is, you and I were talking about this beforehand, and the argument's kind of confusing for a lot of people, is that at what point did Michael Jordan have another top 5 player in the entire NBA on his team? And some people are going to try and say Scotty. I think Scotty's legacy is lifted up more by Michael than it is his actual play. He for sure is like a hallmark in like the NBA, and it's difficult to tell a story without him, but it's difficult because he was so tightly connected with Jordan more than it is like he was so essential to basketball history. It's just my personal take on it. When it comes to LeBron has always had, since he went to Miami, minus the year that he was in Cleveland and they got swept, and the year that they won, I think the Cleveland years like validate LeBron's legacy a lot of like what you're saying. But I think when it comes to Miami and when it comes to the Lakers, every year that LeBron's been successful, there's always been generational talent on his team. And I think that's where his legacy will struggle, is that like, I think a lot of people recognize that Pippen is definitely Robin.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
And I think a lot of people, and also I think it goes back to what I said earlier. And so there's not a whole lot for me to say on this conversation, but Anthony Davis is a top 5 player in the NBA when healthy. And when he isn't healthy, how does LeBron's team play? And I think last year
where is Anthony Davis going to stack up all time? Like compared to in comparison to Scottie Pippen, because that's always everyone who's a LeBron James fan. That's always their thing to Michael Jordan. They're like, oh, well, what would Michael have been without Scottie? And I'm here someone saying I'm in the middle. I don't think it's a problem that Michael had Scottie, and I don't think it's a problem that LeBron had Anthony Davis. I would argue that they're pretty similar. I would also say, though, Scottie Pippen's probably higher all time than Anthony Davis is. Would you say that or no?
Sure, but Scottie Pippen's also done playing, and I think also as well, the problem that I would have with it is that Scottie Pippen, we saw in like The Last Dance, there were aspects where he like didn't really want to play. You know what I mean? Like because of like contract disputes, and really the team as a whole didn't change that much. Whereas when the Lakers, like the second Anthony Davis went down, they were not getting out of the first round. And I think that's part of the problem, is that, and I agree, a lot of it's optics. Michael Jordan shouldered through. As soon as LeBron's help didn't help, LeBron collapsed, is going to be the narrative. And I don't think that that's fair, but I think part of the problem is that as soon as the generational talent's injured, now it's all on you. It's difficult, just because of the way that things have worked out for LeBron, it's difficult to even like come to a really solid conclusion, because it's like, well, I mean, every single time that LeBron's had help that's melted down, the team has melted down. And that's part of like the problem, is that optically it's really deceptive, and I get what LeBron fans are saying, but I think it's just, at the end of the day, the history is not going to be super kind. It's just not going to be kind because of how it's worked out for him.
This is the other thing that I'll argue that I think, and before we just wrap this up, but what was Michael Jordan doing when he was the same age as LeBron James? That's all I'll say. Yes, you can argue, oh, well, LeBron needs help. Well, yeah, LeBron's been in the league a lot long. Like at different points in their career, like they were doing different things. LeBron was there earlier and he's there after. And there has to be something to be said about the endurance and the durability. And you can't hold it against the guy for going to get help when he's old. Because if that's the case, then we should just let old people fall when they walk across the street, because we're like, oh, well, you got the experience in life, so you could just pick it up and do it on your own. It's like, no, like sometimes you need a little bit of help.
I agree, but I also think that in the same vein, couldn't you turn it on its head and say, like, Michael Jordan did more in less time? Like, LeBron has had all these years where he's been healthy, and like he's still like, I understand he's gone to more finals, but he also hasn't won more finals with more time, and also with what we would say is more help. And whether or not you think that's fair, but Michael, like I would submit that with more time, he has had less success in the finals, not getting to the finals, but in the finals. Like winning is what most people care about. Most people don't remember who was competing; they remember who won.
Yeah.
And I think that argument can go both ways.
But I disagree just a little bit, because when you basically like the NBA Finals has almost just turned into the LeBron James Invitational Tournament, like, because he's just there every year. So while I agree with you, usually it doesn't matter when you're the loser. When you're there every year, then I think it kind of does matter, because like I do agree. I will subscribe to the 6-0 is like a big deal, but also like he was there before and is gonna be there after. I mean, he's not winning every time, but like he's not stopping, he's not slowing down, he's more consistent, and the longevity is there.
Well, and I also think here's the problem: is it's not just that he's not winning every time. LeBron is not 500 in the finals, versus the player who, and like I
but
agree,
he literally lives there. Michael could only go 6 times.
Yeah, but he didn't lose. I think,
but he didn't even make it enough times to lose one. That's what I'm saying. Is like, yeah, you won 6, but like you couldn't ever make it before or after those.
But I think that's like, regardless of whether or not it's fair, I think it's going to be a problem with LeBron's legacy, is that Jordan has won more times in the finals than, Jordan has been to the finals and won more times than LeBron has won. Like, not been, but won in the finals. And LeBron has been more times. And I think part of, like, I wouldn't think this would be a bigger, I think it would actually be a lot closer if he was over 500. The fact that he's 4-6 is one of the biggest problems. And the other problem is that he doesn't have very much time to fix that. And so,
yeah, but who else is 4-6?
That's true, and I agree with that, and I totally subscribe to that, and I think that's why LeBron is a solid number 2. Like, and it's not even close. I think people who argue like Kobe are like out of their minds, but 6-0 versus 4-6, just you look at that number, and I understand what people are saying. He's been there 10 times, yeah, but he didn't even win 5. Like, at the moment, he can win 5, and he can be 5 out of 11, and he could win again, and he could be 6 of 12, and if he's 6 of 12, I think. Really, at the end of the day, if he gets to 6-12, if he gets there, 6-6, if he gets to 6-6, I think we can start to have the conversation about him replacing Michael, just because of other things that have happened. But until he's 500, that's such a resounding judging number. That's such a it's almost irrefutable. 6-0 versus 4-6. It's the 10 matters. It does matter. But 6-0, like, there's something about an undefeated team versus a team, like, we see this all the time with like a college football playoff. If there's a team with a loss versus the team that's undefeated, so long as there's not an asterisk by the undefeated, it's really hard to argue with 13.
Yeah, but what if my loss came to Clemson in overtime? We'll take this just as a tease to next week, because I do think all the acquisitions make the Lakers worth talking about where we see this team going. And just the Russell Westbrook, the Carmelo Anthony, the Malik Monk, all of these things, we can talk about that, because I think it is worth talking about. And I'll just leave this question before we go, because we're going to talk about something a little bit more enlightening, a little happier. We're going to talk about the 2021 2021 Football Hall of Fame class, but I will just leave it like this for everyone listening. You made the argument that you think LeBron has to get to 6-6 before it matters. I would argue, okay, if he gets to 6-6, that means he won as many times as Michael did, and he was able to get there more times. So does that push him over the limit? Because that's always been everyone's thing, is the 6 championships. But that being said,
the only thing I'll add to that, like, before you transition, is if he gets there, I think people who love Jordan lose their biggest weapon in that argument. I think at that point,
the wall falls.
Really, like, you really, like, if there's not already cracks, like, we're doing battle in the open field. Like, it really is. I don't see how you could say it's undisputed one way.
All of that being said, we will talk about the Lakers next week on Monday, probably, unless something just astronomical takes over and becomes the biggest story of the weekend tomorrow. But, so, 2021 Pro Football Hall of Fame class. I believe the enshrining is either tonight or tomorrow. But here are your Hall of Fame finalists. You have a guard, Alan Faneca. You have a coach, first ever Latino head coach to win a Super Bowl, Tom Flores, and then you have Lions receiver Calvin Johnson, like honestly probably my favorite receiver of all time. Then you have the boy, the man, the 49ers GM John Lynch. Then you got the GOAT Peyton Manning. You got Drew Pearson and Charles Woodson. Of all of these guys, like, which do you have the most memory of, and what are things that still live with you rent-free from some of these guys?
Calvin Johnson is one of the most unguardable people I've ever watched. He's just, every single time you threw the ball to him,
I think the word one of the most is actually disrespectful. I think he's the most unguardable of all time.
Ooh, you're putting him up there with some people.
But that's conversation worth having on its own. The Jerry Rice, Calvin Johnson, because when Calvin Johnson broke the record for receiving yards in a season, you know whose record he broke? Jerry Rice.
I think this is me. I'm a homer, right? I'm a Colts fan, which makes the whole Carson Wentz saga even more sad for me because we will never do anything good ever. But Peyton Manning, right? Like, I'm still salty, and I understand why they did it. I understand why the Colts ended up cutting him, right? I understand the rationale behind it, but it's just Peyton Manning was just you and I, a lot of people considering the conversation we just had, talk about the clutch factor. They talk about the it factor, right? Peyton Manning had it. Peyton Manning had the it factor, and it's just something that Peyton Manning, he just was one of the best managers of not game manager in the negative context, but he saw the game, everything around the game he saw. And he would just, his IQ when it came to the game was so high that it allowed him, when he even went to the Denver Broncos and his game had to change because he wasn't who he used to be. He was able to change a lot of his game in order to win that Super Bowl with the Broncos. I think Peyton Manning really will go down. He's one of the most underrated people that we talk about all the time, and that people just don't, they just forget how good Peyton Manning was at the game of football. He had just had one of the highest level IQs I've ever seen in the game.
I mean, Peyton Manning, I'll just read this off to you just for everyone who wants to know how great Peyton Manning was. He's a 14-time Pro Bowler, 7-time first team All-Pro, which as a quarterback is really hard to do. You have to be the best quarterback in the league to be first team All-Pro. It's not like receiver or running back where there's a couple spots you can fit in. So he's 7-time All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champ. Here's the other kicker. He's a 5-time MVP. Do you realize how hard it is to win the MVP more than once, let alone to win it 5 times? And then he was on the All-2000s Hall of Fame team. He's a 2004 AP Offensive Player of the Year, 2013 AP Offensive Player of the Year, which basically is like you're the MVP of the offense, and you're basically the runner-up to the MVP. And he won the 2005 Walter Payton Award, 2012 AP Comeback Player of the Year Award. Peyton Manning, and here's the other cool thing about Peyton Manning. People want to knock a lot of times on the gunslinger, and I don't think we really often consider Peyton Manning a gunslinger because he didn't have that athletic prowess that we usually, because the reason we call Brett Favre a gunslinger is because he would move around a lot, and we don't always assign that to him. But here's the thing, Peyton Manning he threw 540 touchdowns. But he threw for 250 interceptions. His touchdown ratio is 2-1. It's not great. And obviously some years were better than others. But I think that's one of the coolest things about Peyton Manning is I think for a while he held the record. And he actually might still hold the record. I'm not sure. But at one point he did hold the record for highest interception rate in your rookie year. And it's so cool to see a guy who everybody, imagine... who just got any quarterback, insert X quarterback who just got drafted, Trevor Lawrence, whoever you want to talk about. Imagine if Trevor Lawrence were to go out and lead the league in interceptions. We would probably say he's a bust, right? And I'm sure I mean, I don't super remember Peyton Manning's first years in the league because he got drafted when I don't even know if I was born yet. He was born in 1976. So I would imagine, let's see. Yeah, his first year in the league was 98, the year I was born. So I don't remember his first year in the league, but I'm sure there were a lot of people calling Peyton Manning a bust. He threw for 28 interceptions. He threw for 26 touchdowns and 28 interceptions. So, like, he was honestly a little bit of a liability because he had to throw you like 1.2 interceptions before you could get a touchdown out of him. And it's so cool to see him go from that to now he's arguably, I mean, again, he's a 2-time Super Bowl champion and a 5-time MVP. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Like, he has to be. I mean, it's hard with quarterbacks because there's so many good ones. He has to be top 10, if not top 5.
Right. And I think also, like, I don't know if people think about it this way, but my thought process is if you throw that many interceptions, because if you throw, like, turnovers in the NFL are not like turnovers in college, right? No. Turnovers in college, it's like, frick, you did that. Like, you really shouldn't have done that. It makes our job harder, but, like, you can recover. If you turn over the ball in the NFL, like,
you're not getting that back.
No. It's that you just gave, like, you might as well look at it like you just gave them points. Like, you didn't just throw an interception. You gave them anywhere from 3 to 7 points, right? And the idea that someone can throw the ball that much and amass that level of interception and still accomplish what he accomplished, do you know how good you have to be at offense in order to do that? Like, in order to win as much as he did, in order to, like, to be as good as he was at his position while also having that major flaw in your game. Like, do you know how good you have to be at quarterback? Like, it's insane the level that he played at. And it was such a high level for so long. And even towards the end of his career, the willingness to adapt his game in order to win, that's the competitive mindset, right? That's what we always talk about. It's like the person who wants to win more than anything and is willing to change their game in order to do so. That's what we like talk about in sports, and that's like the ultimate competitor is someone who's willing to win no matter what. And Peyton Manning embodies that, and it doesn't surprise me at all that he's going.
No, it's really cool to see where he is. I would like to go back and touch on Calvin Johnson though, because we started with Calvin Johnson. I think out of all these guys, the guys that are worth talking about in this Hall of Fame class are Peyton Manning, Calvin Johnson, Troy Polamalu, and Charles Woodson, which is cool to see 2 safeties be getting in. But Calvin Johnson, 6-time Pro Bowl, all 2010s Hall of Fame team, 3-time All-Pro. He's going into the Hall of Fame. Calvin Johnson he's my favorite receiver of all time. Say what you want about where you think he is all time. To me, he's easily number 3 all time. I don't think you can argue with Jerry Rice. Like, Jerry Rice is literally the GOAT. But this is the other question. Calvin Johnson's only 32nd on the all-time receiving yards list, but he also only played 9 years in the league. So he played like 2/3, almost like half as long as most of these guys, and he like was still able to finish like top 30.
He's just dead. It was every single time. He's like the one positive thing that like the Detroit Lions have had for such a long time.
Which is so funny that they have so much beef now.
It's hilarious. Like, you could hand it to the Detroit Lions, right? Only the Detroit Lions could have one of the best players to ever play the game of football.
They have 2. They have Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson.
Dude, it's what I'm saying. They have these players, and they managed to piss off everyone at all times. There's never. Sometimes sometimes not to like use the relation. We use the relationship like analogy way too much.
But I think that's because it literally applies to everything.
But man, like there's sometimes like when you're in a relationship, like it's usually pretty good. And then there's sometimes where you're like move very still, like be very still. Don't move too suddenly because I'm on the hot seat at the moment. And like even the most basic, even most animals understand when hunting, don't move. Don't move because if you move, it's coming after you, right? Being hunted by a big cat.
Yeah.
The Detroit Lions are like banging the bongo every single minute of the day, always being hunted, and they just keep getting killed. They just get murdered.
The Detroit Lions are like dating a really, really hot girl or a really, really hot guy. Man, but they are dumb as a bag of rocks. Like literally the only thing, or maybe not even that they're really attractive, but like they just have one thing going for them. Like they just have like an amazing face or amazing the rest of them, however you want to call it. Like, but there's literally nothing else going for them. But they want to flaunt it like they got everything and they really don't. And it's so sad. My favorite quote of all time surrounding Calvin Johnson is, "It's never a bad option to throw to Calvin Johnson." And the broadcasters would say that all the time. But I'm telling you, like, go back and watch some of these Calvin Johnson highlights. There are times, like, Dan Orlovsky is a pitiful NFL quarterback, and the reason you've never heard of him is because he played quarterback for the Lions, and he was bad. Most people probably don't even know. Most people probably won't remember that much about Matt Stafford, but the only reason they will is because he played with Calvin Johnson. There are some of these highlights where, like, Calvin Johnson was legitimately in triple coverage. And if you're a quarterback, if you see triple coverage, you immediately look to the other side of the field, because if there's 3 guys on one guy, somebody has to be open. And they would just be like, oh no, we're going to throw it to Calvin Johnson anyway. And like when you would watch those plays, you were like, well, that was a stupid pass. And then you just see Calvin Johnson just go up over top of everyone. It was like he was playing basketball going up for a rebound, and he looked like he was playing with children.
And it's also the really interesting thing. I have like a whole bunch of highlights pulled up right now that I'm watching as we speak. The interesting thing also about Calvin Johnson is that there are a lot of, like, when you think of Odell Beckham Jr., he's a finesse receiver, right? It's about the skill. It's about like the ball needs to be placed in like a general area, but for him, it's about not style. That's not the right word, but it's about like finessing the ball, right? Like it's a very finesse play. It's a very technique and skill play. Calvin Johnson was that, but also Calvin Johnson, like, cornerbacks and safeties would try and hit him, and he would run them over.
Oh yeah,
like, he would run people over, and not only would he run them, like he would run them over, and he would keep going, and people would hit him. Like it plays today that like players would get hit and they would be on the floor for a minute. Calvin Johnson would get hit like that, and he'd pop right back up just to let them know that he scored. Like,
yeah,
dude was durable. Like, he was extremely durable, which is like really sad that he played for as little as he did.
And Tom Rinaldi asked him this at the Hall of Fame game, the Dallas Cowboys Pittsburgh Steelers Hall of Fame game on Thursday that we talked about a little bit. Tom Rinaldi asked him, he was like, do you think you could score even more yards and more touchdowns in the league now? And Calvin Johnson goes, it's almost to the point where I feel bad for the defense, because you basically can't touch these wide receivers. Calvin Johnson would have I think it's the reason that, like, it's sad, but I don't ever think anyone is ever going to overtake Calvin Johnson, Randy Moss, and Jerry Rice for the greatest receivers of all time, because the things they were able to do with the game being called the way that it was, and evident by the other 2 guys who just got inducted into the Hall of Fame. Troy Polamalu would probably have faced multiple lawsuits for the way that he hit people back in the day, but we just appreciated it. And Calvin Johnson would take those hits, and you had to put 3 people on him because you didn't have because the problem was your cornerback, while he was, God doesn't build people like Calvin Johnson anymore. In fact, I would be willing to bet that God, like, didn't even realize what he was doing when he created Calvin Johnson. He was like, oh shoot, this one I made this one, like, this was my player in like Madden. I did not remember making guys this big. Calvin Johnson was bigger, faster, and stronger than you. And on top of all of that, he ran a 4.3 44, being, how tall was he? 6'5", 240 pounds, which, if you're not familiar, is a couple inches and a couple pounds short of what LeBron James is. And he's faster. So the problem was your cornerback wasn't big enough to stick with him. Your safety wasn't fast enough, and neither was your linebacker, but like you had no other option, because he was going to easily dominate you anytime you got a 1-on-1, and even sometimes you got a 2-on-1. You just put the ball up high enough, he'll catch it. And then, like you said earlier, sometimes they would actually still hit him, and he would run away from them anyway.
I think you put Calvin Johnson like on in any competent organization, And like, can you think about this? Like Matt Stafford and Calvin Johnson in any other scenario, and that's one of like the greatest tandems you've probably ever seen. Like both receiving and throwing. Like that was an insane duo, and they were just on the Lions. They just had the unfortunate like coincidence of being both on the Lions, and that's just it is one of those things where you get kind of sad sometimes, and every team deserves a shot, and like teams redeem themselves, but man, some teams just like they really do waste some of the most amazing player careers of all time, and they're just incompetent. It's crazy.
Matt Stafford has a statistic that I would be willing to venture and most people don't know, and I think it says just as much about Calvin Johnson as it does about Matt Stafford. If I were to ask you who in the league, and let's say you didn't know the answer was Matt Stafford, but if I were to ask you who in the league holds the record for most fourth quarter comebacks in the regular season in history, who would you say before you said Matt Stafford?
If I had to do the most fourth quarter comebacks, honestly, Brett Favre wouldn't shock me.
No. Or Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, like all of these guys. No.
Tom Brady, just because of like the Atlanta Falcons thing.
Yeah, Matt Stafford holds that record. And I would be willing to bet that a large factor in that record is Megatron. Like, his nickname is better than everybody else's. He's actually called like one of the baddest villains ever, Megatron. I don't understand how you think that you can get any more power and fear out of a 3-syllable nickname than he's literally a Decepticon. He actually had Nike putting Decepticon logos on his shoes because that's how bad of a man he was.
Also, his focus, like when the ball was thrown to him, I'm looking at these highlights. Some of like the catches that he made, right? The focus that he displayed, because like the ball would bounce around a lot, and dude would catch everything, right? Like the ball would get thrown in like some of the worst situations I've ever seen. Like just, you know, those situations where like you're just head hunting. You know what I mean? Like you are literally putting the receiver's life at risk, like with the hit that they're about to take. And he would juggle, and like the level of concentration where he had both the awareness to like where the ball was and how he was going to catch it, but not only that, but how he was going to drag his feet. He just had such great situational awareness that I don't see very much in receivers, right? Like a lot of these receivers that you see sometimes, like they give up on balls because they're like, freak, that was just a bad throw by the quarterback and I can't be blamed for that one. Calvin Johnson literally would make quarterbacks look like they were the greatest of all time because they would throw the ball and he just had such concentration that he would make it look like they put it where they were supposed to.
He is easily... he's unguardable. He has the greatest, like, this is statistics. He has the widest catch radius of all time. I can't remember what it is. You can look it up on Sports Science. But basically, you could throw it with, like, anywhere within, like 10 feet of him, and he could go up and get it, whether it was behind him, in front of him, to either side. It's so sad that his talent was wasted, but it is so cool because like I just have so many memories of when he was, and it's so sad that he had to retire. But also when you just go out and get no help, like you can't blame the guy. But to be as great as he was for that few years in the league, and like he lives in my head rent free. Like if I had to watch highlights of any wide receiver, I think I would probably pick his, just because every time I watch him catch the football on a highlight, every single time, I'm like, why did you make that throw? There's no way he comes down with this. There's 2 guys guarding him. He just makes it look so effortless.
I'm actually watched one just barely from Indianapolis, right, where he catches one, and he's not even using his hand. It's bicep and forearm are literally what he uses to catch the ball with one arm, and that's what he has to do, right? Because the ball is just put in a really good spot, like, but it's just a little far out there, and he literally just forearm to bicep, right? He's not letting go of it. And it's that mentality, right? I'm making the catch. Like, we always talk about it, right? Like, if you can touch it, you can catch it.
Yep.
Right? Is like the mentality. Like, this dude was like, I can't touch it, but I'm going to make it so I can touch it so that I can catch it, right? It's not just that like, oh man, I can't catch this one. Dude, I'm going to put myself in position to catch this. It's insane what he does.
It's so cool to see that he's being inducted into the Hall of Fame because there's not a lot of guys who only play like 8 years in the league and make it into the Hall of Fame. So it's cool to see that from him. Again, we have Charles Woodson and Troy Polamalu also getting into the Hall of Fame, which is really cool for these guys. Like, all of these guys are guys from our childhood. There's a lot more going on, but I think we've exceeded our time for the day. We got people who are losing sponsorships because of COVID. USA is calling out LeBron for winning their gold medal. Tom Brady's calling players ignorant. Phillip Rivers is saying that he wants to come back and like he's in shape and stuff. And then there's the whole thing with what the Colts do at quarterback, which, and again, like I said earlier, we're going to talk about the Lakers thing on Monday. So thanks for hanging out with us. There's so much to come back for on Monday, and y'all have a good weekend.
Ayo, Babs, this shit crazy. Jimmy on the beat.